Hello, and welcome to another of the continuing adventures of Judd. I'm Judd.
I'm going to turn you over to Andy here, who was actually here and worked with some of those animals and who has the experience of actually wrestling and touching Gentle Ben. I mean, from someone who watched that series, it is an amazing thing. So, Andy?
It was a great place to grow up. I looked forward to coming to work. I look forward to getting out of bed and coming here because working with these animals was more than just a job. Back then, we didn't wear uniforms and all, but I could walk down the trails barefooted, and I was cleaning the fishbowl windows and cleaning the windows about twice a week in the summertime because the ultraviolet rays of the sun make the algae grow more than in the wintertime. About the only time two times I wasn't in the water was at night or with lightning. Any other time, it didn't matter if it was 17 degrees, I was in there cleaning windows. Stuff like that, so cleaning the bear, Buck and Tudor were the two bears inside that pen. But so there were several different bears. Gentle Ben was like a stage name. Just like I understand there were several Lassies and what have you. People thought of Gentle Ben, but Ivan Tours had several bears that he used. But they would want to wrestle you. They had wrestled with humans. I was about 185 pounds and about 17, 18 years old, and they would throw me around like a sack of feed. I'd grab him around the neck, and he would lift me off the ground and then throw me. So I'd go airborne against this chain link fence, and people on the other side were worried. And they didn't know the bears were playing, so you'd hear people out of the crowd like, "Oh my God, get out of there!" It's like, "Are you all right? Get out!" Because they didn't understand. When a human was in there, to the bears, it meant play. When I worked at Silver Springs, Ivan Tours was over at Silver Springs. He popped in. He was shooting a Loch Ness, what he calls a silhouette, and they wanted a realistic motion of a Loch Ness swimming, creating ripples in the water and all. So what they did is they took a sea turtle, and they made this fiberglass shell and a neck for it. And when the sea turtle was put in the water, and it took all its flippers and did this, and it made ripples in the water, and that's what he wanted. And it was interesting to talk to him. They would shoot things in such a way to where you thought it was all in the same place, but they had different locations. That's common, and they splice it all together on the same film, and the people don't have any idea that it was actually different locations. On film, it looks like the same area. And sometimes when you can't find the right things that you need in that industry, they have to create a situation. We even did that at my father's place over here. Black Mama Productions showed up one day, and they had a gopher tortoise, and they couldn't find a gopher tortoise hole. So we went over to my dad's place, which had about 3, but unknowing to me, my dad had set the gopher tortoise over the fence. He evicted him for what he said not paying their rent, So we ended up digging a hole at the proper angle with a round shovel turned upside down to create a gopher tortoise hole. And that's done in the movies. As I said, these scenes, whether actual or depicted, represent authenticated facts. So I faked this hole for this Channel 3 children's television program. And when we took the gopher out of the box and set him in front of it, he stuck his head out of the shell. He wanted nothing to do with it. He went to the right. So I caught him and brought him back. I put him in front of the hole again a little bit further, and he waited a couple seconds and popped his head out and looked in the hole and went to the right again. And the film crew was getting worried. So I said, "Don't worry about it." So I stuck him right in front of the hole, and the third time was a charm. He stuck his head out, looked in the hole, went about halfway in and started kicking dirt out, and the dirt was just flying on both sides, which is exactly what they wanted. And they said, "Beautiful, beautiful. We couldn't have hoped for better than that." But the hole wasn't real. It was dug with a shovel. Here, it was great because going down the trails in the morning and visiting these animals and cleaning their pens and feeding them, Buck and Tudor, they would look up into your eyes. It was almost like they were happy that you were there. They were glad to see you. And of course, they all have their own personalities. Bears, different cats and such have own personalities. It was a great place to grow up, Homosassa. I swam in the fishbowl. That was my swimming hole when I was a kid. The old swamp buggy, Gentle Ben swamp buggy, used to sit around behind our what is now our maintenance shop. That was an Ivan Tours where he kept the animals. It's now the concrete flooring is what is our maintenance shop is built over. Well, right behind it is where the old swamp buggy used to sit, where they would haul the bears when they were shooting in different terrain. It was just a patch of ferns where that thing sat for years. I remember the vines growing all up through it and everything, and I don't know who it was sold to or who got it.
If there are any questions anybody has out there, we can take questions.
Andy, now that you're more robust,
That's why I was afraid to show that picture.
how much do you do against the bear now?
I've maintained my strength. I can lift what most people can't.
Yeah, how much do you do against the bear?
Well, I wrestled in high school, and I still know all the techniques. I think it would be harder for him to throw me. I'm heavier. But he was, when they come after you, you kind of, Tudor would try to get around behind you, and Tudor would bite you. So you had to keep Buck between, but then Buck would try to sweep you down with his paw. And so you're constantly jumping back. And sometimes I would retaliate by coming around behind him and jumping on him. And then we would go round and round like a rodeo. And it was a wild scene for people to see. I was 185 pounds, and he could sling me with his neck muscles, his head about that big around.
Now, this was actually like going on while visitors were in the park?
They looked forward to it. They'd find me in the park. People would pass in front of the heavy gauge chain link, and they would ask all kinds of questions about them and what they eat and how much they weigh and that type of thing. Meanwhile, the bears are milling all around you. And when I was a kid, I used to lay on the living room floor and watch Gentle Ben in 1967, 69. And just a couple of years later, in 75, I was here in the cages and wrestling with them. Never would I have ever thought that. It's like those other characters that you run into in your life. I used to watch Tarzan, but I didn't know Ross Allen was the guy in the water wrestling the alligators because Johnny Weissmuller was just an actor. So they needed a Steve Irwin type of crocodile alligator expert on very large snakes and what have you. And you'll see him going round and round underwater with like a 6-foot gator and a big snake coiled around him.
Thing here, Ross Allen, snake thing down in Tampa.
Ocala. Silver Springs. I worked there in 78.
He had a show there, didn't he?
Yeah. Brought the Seminole Indians up in 1960s. Bill Gleason told me a story one time that Charlie Cypress, one of the Seminoles, was hoofing it down Silver Springs Boulevard, Highway 40, and Bill Gleason picked him up. Charlie had gotten kind of older and comical, and but still didn't like white man, because of all the things that was done to the Seminole in the past. So Bill noticed that he had found a big plastic button, and he had sewed it to the center of his chest, because they don't wear shirts that have seams like this. It's like a smock. So this big old button. So as he's driving Charlie to Silver Springs to the Ross Allen Reptile Institute, he said, "Charlie, what's the button? Where'd you find that button?" And Charlie looked at him like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "The button on your chest." And he looked at it like, "What is that doing there?" How'd that get there? So you could see he was thinking about it, trying to remember why he did it. And a big smile come to his face, and he says, "I'm getting old." And he says, "I'm forgetting all the important things that I don't want to forget." He said, "I sewed this button here to remind me to hate the white man." So you meet these characters through your life. Little did I know, but when I was watching them on TV, that I would later meet them. LeVar Burton, Geordi on Star Trek. They were shooting Reading Rainbow program with the manatees here. People like that. Newell's Island, when we're shooting the movie out there with Lorimar Productions, I walked away from Ted Swanson and Rico Browning. And they said, "Do you know who that is?" And I said, "Rico?" And he goes, "Yeah, who else?" "Rico Browning?" I said, "Yeah." "Who else?" I said, "He's the creature. He was the guy inside the Creature of the Black Lagoon suit." So what's the chance of all these crossing these paths with different people?
Rico Browning, by the way, he did a lot of the underwater work for Ivan Tours, and he ended up as a producer and director for Ivan Tours and did a lot of the work with him. So there is all this interconnection. It just amazes me that I read a book recently on the springs of Florida, and just how intertwined the movie industry is with all the 5 major springs, attraction springs. That's Wakulla, that's Silver Springs, that's us here at Homosassa, Weeki Wachee, and just for those who don't know, now with Silver Springs as of October will become a state park. All 5 of the major attraction springs now are kind of back home. They are back with the Florida Park Service, so they will be protected.
And that's something I had thought about. A lot of people go to the old Florida attractions, but I grew up being part of them, working at them, Silver Springs and what have you. Weeki Wachee was a sister company. ABC, American Broadcasting Corporation, ABC Television, owned Silver Springs back then, so they owned Weeki Wachee too. And then Homosassa and Rainbow Springs and another state park, Rainbow Springs. But I was kind of behind the scenes associated with or working at these places. So I kind of grew up as a kid, an attraction kid, and then ended up staying with it with state parks and taking the knowledge I had learned and the skills like scuba diving and cleaning the fishbowl windows, and they used me for underwater maintenance on bridges and various other things. When we put the coffer dam in and had to replace all the glass windows in the fishbowl, and I was really nervous that coffer dam was going to start leaking. That thing would have went to the bottom. But you get that experience that later on in your life you wouldn't give millions of dollars for, because it was so great. The Park Service is in the same area, but it deals with interpretation and things more than what we did back then. A lot of times our actions back then were interpretation.
I'm just glad I don't have to wrestle bears anymore to be part of it, because that just wouldn't work. My experience with bears is I give them a marshmallow through a chain link fence. That's it.
I'll always remember Homosassa, because every day just coming to work was fun. And you worked with otters and chimps and bears, tigers, cougars, woolly monkeys. And then you threw on some scuba gear, go down there and jump in, spend my day with the fish and swimming down through the rocks. And it was great.
If you're interested to follow up on Ivan Tours, Ralph Help, or any of that, The Gentle Jungle, you can pick this up at a used bookstore. I don't think they're still in print. And also Ivan Tours has a kind of autobiography called My Life in the Wild. And if you're an Ivan Tours fan, if you grew up on his Gentle Ben and Flipper and all those TV series, it's a good thing to have, because it does kind of takes you back. And he was a lot more influential than what we thought. So thank you so much for your attention.